Furthermore, it once again talks about those who are deluded by their own power in their earthly life. They imagine themselves powerful. They imagine themselves rich. They imagine themselves independent or not in need of the divine. Virtue and ethics is like a muscle. The more you train to exercise it, the better it becomes. Selfishness is a habit. If you wake up and all you think about is yourself, from the time you wake up till the time you go to bed, your selfish muscle is very strong. That it takes a real effort to think about anything else or anyone else. In fact, you might lose your sense of empathy. A 12-year-old that converts and his entire life from there on is about the Prophet and about Islam. I mean, you can't separate Ali's character from the Qur'an, and you can't separate anything he said or did from his relationship to the Prophet and relationship to the Qur'an.
Are you making the point that in today's day and age that people should try to check their previous knowledge at the door when doing tadabbur, reflection on the Qur'an and trying to learn the Qur'an to increase their ibadah, their dhikr and their prayer, and approach the Qur'an slowly with reflection in a sane manner that the companions did? Because they didn't, like you made the point that the companions did not have a corpus of ahadith or a lot of significant events that had taken place. It was coming down slowly.
What I am saying is that first you look into yourself and you make the assessment, do you need restructuring? Do you need to be rebuilt? Because that's a very important, none of the people that came to Islam came with a blank sheet, right? They all came and they had personality types. It's very clear in the tradition that Abu Bakr was a personality, Bilal was a personality, Umar was a personality. And so you, for a Muslim today, they need to ask themselves, do I need to be rebuilt? And then if the answer is yes, then yes, you go back and try to understand what it means to be awwal al-Muslimin, that I've talked about a lot in several khutbahs, that I am the first of Muslims. And ask yourself, because all the laws in the world are not going to avail you anything if you don't understand what the Qur'an was talking about, for instance, when it told you at the very beginning, the very first command, iqra. If you basically have a lazy attitude towards knowledge and you don't even understand what the Quranic command of iqra is, and you don't know what it means that you don't live by your whims and desires, but live by an active relationship with your Lord, then it's a very logical and simple point. What were all the laws in the world avail you? There are a lot of people who know a lot of riwayat. They can tell you all types of stories about the Sahaba. But then when you engage them, you discover that they don't have makarim al-akhlaq. They don't have that very basic. Now, But when the Quran, for instance, says, وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ, you are of great moral character, we have to pause and ask, what does this mean? Now, one, we have to understand that a great moral character, there is a level of morality and ethics that is contextual. So for instance, a person of great moral character at that time was, if they get a guest, they put them up for 3 days and nights, no questions asked. That was part of what khuluq azim meant. Does this mean, so that embodied karam, generosity. In our day and age, generosity could mean something else, something different. So it doesn't mean that in our day and age you have to put people up for 3 days and nights. Why? Because we don't have a command that tells us put up people for 3 nights. But we have a command that says generosity is part of khuluq azim, is part of good. So then you must ask yourself within your own context, what does generosity embody? And this is part of and again, this is something that I'm gonna inshallah tie, because it's important to tie when constantly we see time and again the earliest Muslims say, what is this faith about? And the answer that they would come up is that this is a deen yad'u li makarim al-akhlaq. It is a religion that calls you to makarim al-akhlaq, the best of ethics. So you must pause and you must ask yourself, and this is what are the best of ethics? Now, the best of ethics, even beyond the historical moment, the contextual moment, sociological moment, the best of ethics, if you are living in Egypt, could be different than what you're living in the United States. But what is constant is that you must embody what would be socially recognized as the best of ethics. That people that encounter you would say, aha, this is a person who is the best of ethics. But at the same time, and this is where you must have the type of moral recognition where your ethics are not simply defined by social tradition. Because sometimes social tradition will take you to what is actually unethical. Now, what is the imperative? Because God didn't give us a code, and the reason God gave us a code, because the danger in a code is that you would surrender your morality to that code. But what God demanded of us is constant vigilance, is that you are constantly posing that question, engaging that question. Does it, if I am min al-musallin, if I am among those people who worship, then I must also embody makarim al-akhlaq or khuluq azim. And do I in fact embody that? Or when I am honest with myself, or if in fact I am quite often not a person of great ethical character because I fail in a variety of ways. And it is this, that's the difference between a purposeful life and a whimsical life. A purposeful life, you are never just satisfied with the assumption that whatever you do is right and proper. And how can you engage in that dynamic without the Qur'an? And that is why it's so important that if you start out with the Qur'an by reading Surah al-Baqarah, for instance, and say, okay, yeah, I'm going to make the Qur'an a meaningful interlocutor in my life by reading Surah al-Baqarah, you will be overwhelmed. Because Surah al-Baqarah requires learning. It's as if God, it's like everything you take in gradations and you evolve in learning. You start out by Surah Iqra and Surah al-Qalam and Surah al-ʿAsr, and you evolve into an understanding for now. Surah al-Baqarah now deals with society and civilization building, and the idea that what the social units are obligated to do, rather than you as a believer and your role as an individual believer. So it is the reason I keep emphasizing this is because I imagine the Sirah, we keep saying, is there for us to model ourselves after. Now, in order to model yourself after anything, you must put yourself, when you model, you are in fact constantly asking this hypothetical: what would I do if I was in X situation? So, to understand that momentous moment in which these people, they find someone of great moral, ethical character and comes and tells them, I am inviting you to a path where you are going to do a lot of acts of submission to your Lord, not to me, but to your Lord. You are going to do salah and zikr, and you are going to be engaged in a self-critical dynamic where you are going to be constantly asking yourself, is your moral character sufficient? And you are going to, and this will entail enormous sacrifices, not just sacrifices in terms of prestige and wealth in the society in which you live, but even sacrifices that I will demand that you put your life on the line, participate in battle, and you might lose your life in battle, and you indeed might lose all of your wealth, and you might lose, and the critical question for all of us, would you have been one of the people that would have followed the Prophet? Because that is really, it's essentially what it's all about, right? Would you have been one of those people that have said, you know, the principle matters to me more than anything, so ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah. Because as we will see, from even before Mecca started persecuting Muslims, so many of these people who converted immediately clashed with their family and their social circle. And their social circles, as we will see, immediately started punishing them. I mean, either physically or they kicked them out of the house. Many of them, as we will see, inshallah, they go to the Prophet and say, our family kicked us out of the home. Can we stay in your home? And he put them up because they had nowhere to go. And the constant question, when I say, okay, I want to be a meaningful Muslim, this has to be something more than just, a tribal association. I am among the Muslim tribe. Ask myself, would I have been willing to make these sacrifices? I would say that you would never be willing to make these sacrifices unless this message meant something to you. Unless the words of this Qur'an resonated with you in a way that became transformative. So, if you want it in a nutshell, the Qur'an has to become transformative in your life. Because if it's not, then there is a real question as to in what sense are you a Muslim? I mean, may Allah accept, but that is really the crux of the matter, and that's why reflecting upon it, and it's, you can read the Qur'an with great contemplation, or you can read the Qur'an as if it's a form of music, a distraction away from reality rather than an engagement with a moral enterprise, a moral journey. So even, just to go back to, so again, among the earliest surah are 73 and 74. And look, if you take the cumulative message, now the 73 and 74 is Ya ayyuha al-Muzzammil and Ya ayyuha al-Muddaththir. Ya ayyuha al-Muzzammil is the command when God comes and says, you who are wrapped in person, al-Muzzammil is a person who's high, sort of wrapped up in covers. And al-Muddaththir has a very close meaning to that. And in both situations, as we did in the tafsir, if you remember, the command is shed away your falsehoods, shed away your delusions, shed away your false protections, shed away the way you protect yourself from, or the way you escape reality. And now get up and make your life a meaningful one. This is from the tafsir, right? Now, however, we notice that in both of these surah, the commands that come to the early Muslims and to anyone that is taking this journey, this Quranic journey towards Allah, is فَقْرَأُوا مَا تَيَسَّرَ مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ. So read the Qur'an. So that becomes an affirmative. So this, now we get an affirmation that as these early Muslims would meet in Dharr al-Arqam, they in fact make the Qur'an the center of their meeting. They're meeting to read ma tayassar min al-Qur'an. Now, look how civilization and familiarity can become dogma and can become sort of numbing. Every time we have a Quranic recitation by a reciter of the Quran, the announcement made, a sheikh such and such is going to read ma tayassara min, ma tayassara min Quran. It's the same expression. But it has become, that idiomatic expression has become meaningless in our day. He's going to read whatever is possible to read from the Quran right now. But the way it was originally used, when Allah says, read ma tayassar here means what you are able to digest. So it's like saying, digest it carefully. Don't rush through it. This is a message that has to be digested. So, and this is what happens with everything that human beings develop familiarity with. Eventually, they strip it of meaning. So, okay, so make the Quran, and then in both of these surah, There is an affirmative command to lose sleep, sacrifice sleep as you worship your Lord. So Allah explicitly says that Allah knows that you do spend a certain amount and a certain amount of time at night worshiping. And Allah affirms this and validates it by telling the Prophet and his followers, this is what Allah expects from you. The sacrifice of comfort in building a relationship with your Lord. Now, how many internalizing a command like this it is impossible to internalize a command like this and for your prayers to become pro forma. The way that people will do prayers is that, it's time for Salah and there's Allahu Akbar and they just go through the motions, and a lot of times they're thinking about something else as they're doing the prayer. But in this earliest of revelation is every indication that prayer must become a meaningful engagement. Now, furthermore, it once again talks about those who are deluded by their own power in their earthly life. They imagine themselves powerful. They imagine themselves rich. They imagine themselves independent or not in need of the divine. But then in this surah, that is tied to, it tells you that if you want to understand why there are people that are stubbornly resistant to al-haq and to truth, to what is just, to what is right, and attracted by jabarut, they're attracted by jabarut is anything that is arrogant and oppressive. Then understand that it is because of human folly in imagining that imagining its power to be in becoming power intoxicated, and in imagining that it does not need its Lord. So, but then what is also underscored here is that when when the fate of these people in the hereafter, what is the moral failure that they've committed? The moral failure is لَمْ نَكُ مِنَ الْمُصَلِّينَ, so we were not among those who worshipped. وَلَمْ نَكُ نُطْعِمْ الْمِسْكِينَ, that وَلَا نَحُضَّ عَلَى طَعَامِ الْمِسْكِينَ, that they were among those who ignored those in need. So they tie this to al-khuluq al-azim. And what is the moral failure here? It is selfishness. That they thought as long as they live meeting their own needs and the needs of their family, as these surah describe, people who only worry about their needs and the needs of their children or the needs of their people, but selfishly ignore the needs of others, they're described as those who are lost, who do not attain salvation. So again, if you put these elements together and you ask yourself, you are an early convert to Islam, and you say, okay, I'm learning that the intellect is important, but the intellect can gravitate towards selfishness and can gravitate towards arrogance. And I'm learning that it is not just my prayer and my worship is not just about a selfish relationship with my Lord, but it is about being socially responsible and socially aware. And there are moral failures of people, and I see examples all around me in life, because as the early Muslims would see in Meccan society, whether it is al-Walid ibn Mughira or Abu Lahab or Abu Jahl, people who are arrogant, haughty, do not care about the suffering of those who are lesser than them in society. So it is creating a prototype of the antithesis of an Islamic personality. And this is quite important, because if you're inviting someone to Islam, the question is, well, what is that prototype that you're inviting me to? If I am being asked to be a Muslim, what is the picture of that character that you are telling me I must, and constantly these early revelations are hammering the idea that worship means humility, worship does not mean arrogance, worship does not mean elitism, worship does not mean selfishness. Okay. Then we get, of course, after that, the Surah al-Fatiha is revealed, the third or the fourth revelation, and Surah al-Masad, Tabbat yada Abi Lahab wa Tab. And, if you can review the tafsir about the surah. But the revelation that comes after this is Surah 81. And 81 has a very important theme. This is Surah al-Takwir. إذا الشمس كورت وإذا النجوم انكدرت وإذا الجبال سيرت وإذا العشار عطلت. So it immediately brings to your mind consequences, the hereafter. That's first. But then it focuses, or it brings to your attention to وَإِذَا الْمَوْءُودَةُ سُئِلَتْ بِأَيِّ ذَنْبٍ قُتِلَتْ. As we talk, by the way, I just forgot that, as we talked about in the tafsir, one of the most remarkable things about these, the Surah 73 and 74, is that it, long before Muslims have engaged in any type of warfare, there's a mention that Allah knows that there will be among you those who yuqatilu fi sabilillah, those who are fighting in the path of their Lord. So it's one of the Qur'an is full of these references of a God who knows what the future will hold. But anyway, so back to 81. what is the moral consequence that it focuses on? And it focuses on the murdering of young girls in Meccan society, the burying of young girls in Meccan society. So it immediately instills that sense of social responsibility. You cannot be among the musallin, you cannot be among those who worship and have an arrogant, haughty, selfish personality, and you cannot be among those who worship, among those who belong to Islam, and engage in a morally reprehensible act like murdering your daughters. And one of the other thing that at that very early point in the revelation, Surah 81 refers to the Qur'an as dhikrun lil-alameen, as a message to humanity at large, which is quite remarkable when you think that you are in Mecca, you're still overall hiding the Islamic message. You're still preaching in sort of pseudo secrecy. But yet the Quran describes itself as a message to humanity at large. Just so you see the extent to which there's a Syrian, I don't like calling him a scholar because I don't have much respect for his work, called al-Tarabishi. And, he writes among these secularized Muslim intelligentsia that, are the product of everything that Western colonialism has produced. He writes this whole thing about how the Islamic message first started out basically as a local message in which the Prophet was basically thinking of himself as a prophet to his people, meaning a prophet to Ali Talib that was in his family or was in his clan. And completely oblivious to the fact that from the very beginning, the Quran refers to itself as a universal message. Okay. And again, the surah that comes after Surah 81, Surah 87, where this is Surah 87 is Surah al-ʿAla, سبح اسم ربك الأعلى الذي خلق فسوى والذي قدر فهدى. So notice in this surah the core moral refrain, other than again prayer and remembrance of resurrection and remembrance of accountability, قد أفلح من تزكى, that who are the truly rightly guided ones are those ones who, and here tazakka means giving in charity. It doesn't mean the zakah, the legal amount, but those who are charitable. And قد أفلح من تزكى is mentioned before فذكر اسم ربه فصلى. So as many commentators have noted, that not only is being charitable tied and connected to the idea of dhikr and salah, it's as if your dhikr cannot be taken seriously. And your salah cannot be taken seriously unless you are also charitable. But in fact, charity is mentioned before dhikr and salah. And if you put the entire picture together, it is because Allah has been teaching you throughout that those who live selfishly, their salah and dhikr is meaningless. It has no impact. So, and again, the surah after that, 92, Surah al-Layl, wal-Layl إِذَا يَغْشَى. Now, again, it reminds you, أما من بخل واستغنى وكذب بالحسنى. من بخل واستغنى, that who refuses to give in charity and lives selfishly. Who are the truly blessed ones? Who are the truly Muslim ones? Who are the truly ones that attain salvation? الذي يؤتي ماله. So other than salah, which is constantly, of course, when we can all see how every revelation is focusing on the core role of salah, but always associated now with social responsibility. الذي يؤتي ماله يتزكى, that who gives charitably of their money. The revelation that comes again after this, Surah al-Fajr, this is 89. وَالْفَجْرِ وَلَيَالٍ الْعَشْرِ. What does it focus on? كَلَّا لَا تُكْرِمُونَ الْيَتِيمِ. You are, what is the sign of your moral failure? It has talked about al-khuluq al-azim. Well, what is the opposite of al-khuluq al-azim? What is the opposite of great moral character? لا تكرمون اليتيم. You ignore, you are oblivious to the suffering of the orphan. Because karam al-yatim is not just you are charitable, but the form of the word here is to take care of. You fail to take care of the orphan. Well, who is the orphan in society? It's the powerless. That who does not have means of aid and support. And what else? وَلَا تَحَضُّونَ عَلَى طَعَامِ الْمِسْكِينِ. And tahaddun is a very fascinating expression, because it is not just وَلَا تُطْعِمُونَ الْمِسْكِينَ. It doesn't say you don't feed the needy. No, it says you don't urge one another to feed the needy. Imagine the type of social ethos that you need in order to urge one another to feed the needy. So it's not just telling you it's not that you just don't feed the needy, but your life is not about feeding the needy. This is not what you encourage one another to do. This is not what you organize your life to do. And what else? And then it says that تحبون التراث, that and you وتحبون المال حبا جما, that what is the opposite of the moral character that Allah wants? The opposite is that you love money and you are centered, and turath is other forms of wealth like property. So you covet wealth and you love money. Now, the revelation coming after that is 93, Surah al-Duha. And Surah al-Duha, in which Allah starts out by telling the Prophet, I know that this path is hard. This moral path, the path in which you are modeling an ethical human being. Because if you take if your attitude is, oh, well, that's the Prophet, then the whole value of modeling is gone for you. Because there are so many Muslims, when you try to approach them about the life of the Prophet, their attitude, oh, well, that's the Prophet. Well, if the Prophet doesn't model for you, then not only you have no role for the Prophet, but you have no role for Islam itself. Because what is the Qur'an about? It is about Allah speaking to the Prophet, so the Prophet models for you. And why does the Prophet, what were these early Muslims about? They were about meeting with the Prophet, learning, modeling from him. And what are they modeling? So what is Allah telling the Prophet in Surah al-Duha in 93? Allah tells them that this path is hard. And then when Allah says, وَلَسَوْفَ يُعْطِيكَ رَبُّكَ فَتَرْضَى, Allah will give you, Allah will take care of you. It's like saying Allah will take care of you. Remember that this person that Allah is telling, Allah will take care of you, has lost not one son and not two sons, but is going to lose all his children except for one. He's survived only by one child, Fatima, his daughter. Why do I mention this? Because, again, if we are modeling the Prophet, most of us, I would dare say the majority of us, if we lost a child, we would feel betrayed by Allah. We would feel that Allah has not taken care of us. But this man, Allah is telling him, Allah will take care with the full awareness that you're going to rob this man of all his children in his lifetime. Because taking care of someone is staying your heart on the path of truth despite the difficulties. That's what's really taken care of. The abandonment is when Allah leaves you to your devices and lets shaitan take over you. But when Allah stays your heart, even if you sin, but you come back, and Allah stays your heart on the path, that's taking care of you. That doesn't surrender you to your demons. And so, but what then does Allah expect from you? And again, we are told in Surah al-Duha, فَأَمَّا الْيَتِيمَ فَلَا تَقْهَرْ وَأَمَّا السَّائِلَ فَلَا تَنْهَرْ. So Allah ties this to what? To do not oppress the orphan. Again, social responsibility towards the needy. And do not turn away the needy. La tanhar means don't speak to them harshly or rudely. So it's not just that you need to help them, but you can't even speak to them in a manner that would have not raised an eyebrow in Quraysh. Of course, the needy people, you can speak to them arrogantly. You can tell them, wait until I have time for you. Or you can tell them, wait until I'll see if I can help you. That all would be, and if we learn the character of the Prophet ﷺ, that all would be considered part of Nahr al-Miskin, or Intihar al-Miskin, that you are, in fact, not being gracious, which is what is demanded on you. So we can go on, but these are, for example, the first 10 surahs that we know that within the first 3 years most definitely were revealed. And there are others we can add, like Surah al-ʿAsr, for instance, which comes and says, now, earlier we were told that you in fact urge one another to take care of the poor. But so in Surah al-ʿAsr, where it tells you that those who are truly Muslim, those who are truly attain that status of being the winners, are tawasaw bil-haqq, those who urge one another on haqq, on truth. Now, haqq is a very inclusive word because it is everything that is right and proper and just. But this brings something I already mentioned in response to Cheyenne's question, but I want to underscore in understanding this sort of. So you are invited to this faith, and as we see, we have repeated examples. How do people come to this faith? They hear the Qur'an. They are either someone recites to them surah, or they read, if they are literate, they read the part of the Qur'an, and that brings them. So they hear this message, and what we see repeatedly, and I'm going to go through one example, and then we'll leave the other examples, inshallah, for future halaqas. I want to give you and tie this sort of tapestry together by going through at least the conversion of one of the earliest converts, and we'll take just one example and see if we have time for more than one example today. There are many that one can focus on. But even if we take someone, I said one example, but I'll make one example plus maybe a few simpler ones. Someone like ʿUtba bin Ghazwan. His full name was ʿUtba bin Ghazwan bin Jabir al-Mazini. We don't know much about ʿUtba, although he lived a long life, because we know that he immigrated to Abyssinia, came back to Mecca, and then he became very homesick, so he came back to Mecca. Then he immigrated again from Mecca to Medina and lived until the Khilafah of Umar ibn al-Khattab, and he died in Umar's Khilafah. And he was among the transmitters of some hadith, etc. But ʿUtba bin Ghazwan, one of the things is that he is approached by the Prophet ﷺ, hears some of the Qur'an, is convinced that this is the truth. He's not a man from an influential tribe. He's not a man from an influential clan. And as I said, the Prophet ﷺ made it a point to invite to Islam people who were not part of his clan or his tribe, so that it doesn't become a tribal issue. In fact, that comes later. But the first years, he's inviting people like ʿUtba, who is from Mazn and not from Ali Talib. But one of the things that is very striking about ʿUtba's conversion is that when he converts, he is immediately ostracized by the Meccans. This is before the message goes public. But the word is getting around that Muhammad is saying he's a prophet, and he is inviting people to this faith, and we hear what the Qur'an is about. And what we know the Qur'an is about is that it is condemning the models of our leadership. The leadership like Abu Jahl, like Abu Lahab, like al-Mughira. And what is wrong with these models is that they're arrogant, they're haughty, they're elitist, and they're selfish. And so the ostracism begins immediately. And ʿUtba finds himself very soon after his conversion ostracized to the point that he goes hungry. And there are reports that he is starving in Mecca to the point that he starts eating the leaves of trees, cutting off leaves from trees and eating them. And again, I've always posited this because I always reflect upon what would I have done if I was invited to this message and knew very quickly that what this message does is that it is saying, ignoring the orphans the way that they're ignored. Well, first, this message is going to tell me, spend a lot of time in prayer. In fact, sacrifice sleep, stay up and pray. And living your life about worrying about having fun and entertaining yourself is not good. That's not good enough. And you are not just, you are not to kill your children, but you are, it is morally condemnable to ignore the orphans and ignore the needy. And it is taking me back to something that I innately know, that a society is only as moral as how well it takes care of its weakest elements. That it is not about how well you take care of your elite. It is about how well you take care of exactly the opposite, the ones on the lowest rung of society. And then I hear of a story like ʿUtba's, that he became Muslim and he starved to the point that he's going around eating leaves of trees. Would I have followed this faith? Because you know of sacrifices right away. You're aware of this taking place. Let's take Abu Dharr al-Ghifari but before we do that, let me just mention that violence against Muslims starts even before the full-scale persecution. It starts nearly immediately. So, for instance, there is one of the very early converts was a man called Tulayb. And Tulayb is the earliest converts go to Mina, or sometimes they go near Safa al Marwa and they pray together there. And this is at the very beginning, and Tulayb is there among those group of Muslims, the earliest converts. Who exactly was there? Some reports say that Zubair was there. Some say Zubair and Ali and Zayd was. But anyway, we don't need to get into that. But anyway, Auf bin Sabra al-Sahmi sees them praying. And it says, what are these people doing? And he's told, oh, these are the followers of Muhammad. What are they about? Well, these are the people who saba'u, that they have rebelled against our idols, and there is a term that Meccans keep using, that they say saffahu. At-tasfih means they've insulted. And this is, what did that represent when they said that, when Meccans kept saying that they insulted our gods? When you study the way that was expressed, that what Meccans are referring to is that they are basically rebelling against our way of life. Because at this point in the Qur'an, there is no mention of specific aliha or idols by name. That comes later when the Qur'an mentions some of the Qurayshi idols. But the very Quranic descriptions of the prototype of Meccan leaders as Utul and as Zamim, and these very descriptive words, it is condemning the Meccan way of life. And Auf bin Sabra, his attitude was that he started calling the Prophet ﷺ names. He started cussing out the Prophet. And Tulayb got very angry, he struck him. And this led to a fight. So we have other reports that Muslims went to Shi'ab Mecca are the outskirts, and tried to pray there, and then they were attacked and set upon and beaten up. So when one of the questions that is offered, why did Muslims start meeting in Dharr al-Arqam? As we said, Dharr al-Arqam was a 16-year-old who had a house near the Safa al-Marwa, and that Muslims would often meet in this house was because acts of violence had commenced against Muslims, and they were trying to avoid these frictions in meeting in Dharr al-Arqam. So it's not, a lot of times when you read some of the people talk, they talk about the meeting in Dharr al-Arqam as if the Islamic message was a big secret and that it was done, in absolute secrecy. That's not true. It was not preached to the elite of Mecca yet. The heads of Mecca were not confronted with the Islamic message, but they were aware from the very beginning that there were converts, like Imam Ali, for instance, or like the story of Abu Dharr al-Ghifari, which I want to just give as an interesting example. So Abu Dharr comes from the tribe of Ghifar, and that tribe was, subhanAllah, it was a tribe with a bad reputation in Arabia, because Ghifar was known as a tribe that lived off raiding other tribes. And this is typical of, like, when I would talk about intuitive moral sense and so on, is that a lot of Arabs would know that it's not morally upright to make a living from raiding, but yet that existed in many contexts in Arabia. So Ghifar was one of these tribes that, tribes like societies like the society of Quraysh would try not to get on Ghifar's bad side because they were seen as lawless and raiders, pirates in a sense. So Abu Dharr, that's the tribe he's from, and however, Abu Dharr is an interesting fellow because him and his brother, because they are at the same time not happy with the morality of their tribe. And it's sort of interesting, but part of the reason that their tribe made a living from raiding is out of economic necessity, because it is a tribe that had very few economic means of sustenance other than that. So, but anyway, among one of these times, the tribe is suffering a severe economic crisis, and Abu Dharr and his brother and his mother go through a period in which there's no money, there's no means, they're going through a great deal of economic hardship. So they decide to try to travel to Abu Dharr's uncle. And you see why I'm going back, why I'm telling you this whole story. So they travel to this uncle who's living in Yathrib, and the uncle welcomes them, and they are the uncle's guests. And as the tradition among Arabs is that when people come as guests, you must put them up and you must be generous towards them. But something happens that bothers Abu Dharr enormously. And of course his mother and his brother, but the narration focuses on Abu Dharr. And that is, as they are staying with this uncle, gossiping people do something that is very dishonorable. The uncle leaves in the morning, he goes to work, and he leaves at home his wife, his children, Abu Dharr, his brother, and their mother. Well, the gossip starts talking about something improper going on between Abu Dharr and the uncle's wife, which was not true, but that is what people gossiping about. The uncle hears about this, and he starts becoming very cold towards Abu Dharr and his brother and their mother. And Abu Dharr picks up on this, that the uncle is very cold and no longer the nice, generous personality that was. And he finally tells his uncle, okay, what's going on? You are obviously, something is bothering you. And he tells him that I've heard that about something improper going on between you or your brother with my wife when I leave. Abu Dharr is extremely offended at the suggestion and tells the uncle, as to your initial generosity, we are very grateful. But by God, after you have believed what you've believed about us, I will never talk to you again. We are leaving your home, and we are basically, I don't want to see you again. And so he takes his brother and he takes his mother and they leave. But this leaves an impression on the psychology of Abu Dharr and his brother at how morally fickle society is. That they are in need. On the one hand, initially, the uncle comes to their aid by being very generous, but how it's so easy for society to gossip and for people to believe the gossip and it is clear that once they go back to Ghafar, not happy, because they're going back to their initial situation of being destitute. Both Abu Dharr and his brother are convinced that something better than this must be possible. This is an immoral society that dwells in immorality, and they're unhappy, and which anyway. So Abu Dharr's brother travels to Mecca trying to find means or possible opportunities, economic opportunities, or possible work. The most important thing about his trip to Mecca is he comes back to his brother and he tells Abu Dharr, while in Mecca, I've heard the message of this man called Muhammad, who says he's a prophet. And what does he tell Abu Dharr the message is about, which deserves a pause? He tells his brother, يَدْعُو إِلَى makarim al-akhlaq. What this man is calling for is makarim al-akhlaq. It's like, say, virtuous ethics. What he's teaching is virtue. And Abu Dharr hears a little bit of the Qur'an from his brother, but says, he is concerned, he's engaged enough to say, I must travel to Mecca myself to investigate this matter. He arrives in Mecca and he doesn't see Muhammad when he arrives. And he's not quite sure even who Muhammad is, and he's worried because his brother told him that be careful when you travel to Mecca, because if the Meccans know that you're asking about him and they suspect that you're interested in his message, it could mean trouble. So he hangs around the Kaaba. Who spots him? Ali. Now, remember, Ali at this time is a young child. He's 10, 12 years old. But it is very fascinating when you think Ali is sufficiently engaged in the Islamic message that he is keeping an eye out for strangers. So he notices Abu Dharr, and he notices that Abu Dharr is hanging out. So he's a stranger, but he's not. It's clear that Abu Dharr is reserved or has some issue that he's not speaking up about. So Ali invites Abu Dharr to his home, according to the Arab custom of 3 nights and days, no questions asked about why you're there. And interesting, Ali doesn't invite him to the Prophet's home, but he invites him to Abu Talib's home. And Abu Dharr comes stays 3 nights and days. After the 3 days, Ali asks him, okay, why are you here? Who are you looking for? And Abu Dharr says, shall I tell you, but you will guard the secret. That you won't basically go and tell on me. And he says, sure. And he says, I've heard about this man called Muhammad. And I've heard that this man has a message, تدعو إلى makarim al-akhlaq, a message that calls for the virtuous ethics. And of course, we know what Ali's response is. Well, that's my cousin, and in fact, you've come to the right place. And he takes him to meet the Prophet ﷺ. So I want to jump ahead just a little bit. When Abu Dharr later on describes this meeting, and he's talking to his mother. So what does he tell his mother about his meeting with the Prophet? He tells her, رأيته يأمر بالخير وينهى عن الشر ورأيته يأمر بمكارم الأخلاق وكلاما ما هو بالشعر. What I found when I met this man is that what he calls for is what is ethically good, khayr. And what he forbids, or what he advocates against, is everything that is evil. And what he teaches are virtuous ethics, makarim al-akhlaq. And that what he recites are words that are not poetry. So now again, when he describes in a different context, when he is describing the Prophet ﷺ and his meeting with the Prophet, he says, ما رأيت رجلا أفضل منه مروءة. I have not met someone who is more gracious. وأحسنهم خلقا, and someone who has a better moral character. You are talking about someone who is just, his character, his akhlaq are completely overwhelming. وأكرمهم مخالطة. أكرمهم مخالطة means someone who, when he socializes beautifully. You are attracted to the way he socializes with other people, the way he interacts with other people. وَأَحْسَنَهُمْ جِوَارًا, and someone who is more kind and morally responsible towards his guests, his neighbors, his friends, anyone in his circle. وَأَعْظَمُهُمْ حُلُومًا وَأَمَانًا, and I have not met someone who is more forbearing and patient and more trustworthy and truthful. وَأَصْدَقُهُمْ حَدِيثًا وَأَبْعَدُهُمْ مِنَ الْفُحْشِ وَالْأَذَى, and someone who is more, I have not met someone who's more decent and more, or أبعدهم عن الأذى, someone who doesn't harm others. Someone who, when you meet, you say, this person will not harm others. And it goes on, because the description is quite long. And then he says, explaining this, he was talking to a member of his tribe, that when I saw this, فشهدت أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمد, so I became وأسلمت وأسلم أخي أنيس, and so I became Muslim and my brother Anis also became Muslim. So we know from these descriptions that he met this prophet and was overwhelmed by the message of the Qur'an that is not poetry, and the character of this man that represented all the virtue that Abu Dharr and his brother Anis were stung by. That not only are they from the tribe of Ghifar, but he had had this bruising experience with his uncle, which is rather unpleasant. Unpleasant enough that he remembered it and he told other people about it, which is, always interesting when you have these. So then he is so excited, and this again deserves pause. He is so excited that he tells the Prophet ﷺ, this is unbelievable. Why is this being kept a secret? And the Prophet ﷺ tells them, I can't protect you because you're a stranger to Mecca. Go back to your tribe. And he says, well, Mecca doesn't know about this is not, you are not proclaiming this? And the Prophet ﷺ says, no, I'm not, because I cannot, if you proclaim it, or if I proclaim it, I cannot keep my followers safe. One of the most amazing things is, what is Abu Dharr's reaction to this? He says, by God, I will proclaim it. And this again takes us back to what made the Bedouin Arab character is this, if you live under an authoritarian government, it breaks your soul, so that the idea of, I know the truth, so I will speak it out, I will yell the truth out. You're robbed of that. It's taken away from you. But this is precisely because they didn't have an authoritarian government over them, that sort of innate sense of freedom and liberty. So the Prophet ﷺ cannot dissuade Abu Dharr from, he says, no, don't proclaim it because there will be consequences, and he insists. Now, of course, I've always reflected on this. Why didn't the Prophet say, for instance, no, I'm giving you a command, don't proclaim it? Because he could have. But he doesn't. And his character, his personality, you discover throughout is that he will tell people, he will advise people, but he rarely commanded people. Because often you'll have say people, did you tell him not to do this? Or did you tell him what to... A true messenger doesn't command people. He just reminds people. So Abu Dharr, in fact, goes to the Kaaba and stands up and says, I declare that I am now the follower of Muhammad, so on. And Mecca's reaction is to give him a thorough beating. Apparently, or reportedly, he's bloodied, and he is then taken by the Muslims back to the house of the Prophet, and basically, as soon as he gets himself together, he does it again. Sort of this air of defiance. And he is so resentful that at Mecca's obstacle, to him, this is so obvious that this is a man of great moral character, and it's so obvious that this message is calling you to be the best, calling you to be the best selves of yourself. In other words, it is telling you, it is obvious that if you had any sense, you would follow this, because it is telling you to be the best of who you are. And that he does take the prophets, when the prophet tells him, go back to Ghafar and go back to your tribe and wait until you see that we are in a position to protect you. Now, of course, the Prophet, as we will see, did this repeatedly with several people, and I believe it was in part to spread the Islamic message. Because the Prophet, I believe, knew that when Abu Dharr and his brother go back to their tribe with this excitement and this zeal, they will not just sit around doing nothing, that they will be, in fact, excitedly sharing the Islamic message. And this is precisely what Abu Dharr does in Ghifar. Incidentally, one of the interesting things is that while Abu Dharr was being beaten in Mecca, the way that this beating stops is someone yells out, just people remember, this guy is from the tribe of Ghifar, and you don't, if you kill him, tribe of Ghifar will start raiding Meccan caravans, and we don't want that. So, so they relent, or they stop beating him out of self-interest. But when he comes back and he announces that again, after his first beating, they give him a second beating. And there are reports which I spent a considerable time investigating that I believe are unreliable, that say, because they're unreliable because of their chains of transmission, and they're unreliable because of the medieval prototype that Abu Dharr then single-handedly punishes Mecca for its what it did to him and for its oppression of Muslims by single-handedly raiding Meccan caravans, and that he would hold on to their grain and then say to them, if you want your grain, if you want what I've taken from you back, say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, become Muslim, and I'll give you what I've taken from you back. And while these reports, you find in al-Waqidi, and they're repeated by, you find it in Martin Lings and other sources, they're very unreliable. I mean, they're more a product of the imagination of the narrators who wanted to imagine Abu Dharr then, the hero who can. These are exaggerations. What Abu Dharr, we know he does, is that he does go back to Ghifar, and there's no evidence that he goes and lives in a hut by himself, raiding Meccan caravans, as some reports say. And the evidence of that is that eventually, when the Hijrah happens, Ghifar, Islam has made significant inroads, that some reports tell us that even as much as Ghifar had converted. If Abu Dharr had not gone back to his tribe, then how did Islam spread in his tribe, right? And with that type of zeal, what we also know is that Ghifars, as they become Muslim, their raiding days are over. So the bad reputation of Ghifar evaporates. They're no longer, so, which again, when you think of, now let's go back and put this picture together. So we see the Qur'an the earliest revelation emphasizes al-khuluq al-azim and contrasts several models of the opposite: arrogance, the elitism, the selfishness. And someone like Abu Dharr repeatedly underscoring that what he understood this message to be about is makarim al-akhlaq, virtuous ethics, and that the Prophet ﷺ himself embodied that. But when you remember that all of this is taking place in the context of very limited textualism, then what is the lesson that we get from it? Because you have some text that it tells you that makarim, that good virtue or virtuous ethics is feeding the poor, taking care of the orphan, تحضون على طعام المسكين, تواصوا بالحق, all of these things that you care about, taking care of the needy, that you are united in seeking what is righteous and what is true, and so on and so forth. But notice here how much reliance there is on what is innate to the human being and what is intuitive to the human being. In other words, if you come and you tell someone what is the Islamic message about, it's about virtuous ethics, and this person has no clue what this virtuous ethics are, doesn't even bother thinking about what ethics are or what virtue is, then you are hitting a blank. Then that person might be tempted to think that virtuous ethics, okay, I'm just a pure textualist. I know nothing but text. So virtuous ethics is basically that I pray a lot and that I take care of the orphans because the text says this, and I feed the needy because the text says this. But at this point, how about all the other, how does it mean that I cheat? Well, it said don't lie, but how about do I be kind to my neighbor? How about how to handle a property dispute with a neighbor, for instance? How to handle a nuisance with a neighbor? Does it mean that how do I treat people? How do I treat issues of inheritance? There are life throws at us numerous complexities and nuances that underscore the importance of training, because virtue and ethics is like a muscle. The more you train to exercise it, the better it becomes. It's like selfishness is a habit. If you wake up and all you think about is yourself, from the time you wake up till the time you go to bed, your selfish muscle is very strong. That it takes a real effort to think about anything else or anyone else. In fact, you might lose your sense of empathy. The suffering of others, you can't relate to. And you can't relate to because you're not exercising the empathy muscle within you. Your neurons, the pathways in your brain, has lost that. On the other hand, if you are constantly making an effort to be empathetic and giving, that sense of virtue is augmented. Why am I underscoring this? Because I believe that it is clear from the Sirah of the Prophet ﷺ that those earliest of Muslims, and as we will see, what drove this behavior of starving to the point of eating the leaves of trees and becoming Muslim and immediately be willing to be beaten to a pulp and say, is that you emotionally, psychologically, you believed it doesn't matter. Why doesn't it matter? Because I live for a much higher purpose. And what is it that the higher purpose that I'm living for? It is that I am working on makarim al-akhlaq. I am working on becoming, to model myself after this man that is at the heart of the Islamic message, the Prophet Muhammad. That is why when you look at the Islamic civilization, Cheyenne just gave me a copy of Dala'il al-Khayrat. Dala'il al-Khayrat, for instance, is a typical example. This whole text, and there are hundreds of texts like this. What is the entire text? It's basically a love homily towards the Prophet ﷺ. From beginning till end, all it is praising the Prophet, loving the Prophet, nearing yourself to the Prophet. That survived in the Islamic tradition, that awareness that it is the ethical core of this man, the ethical character of this man was at the core of the Islamic message. But it is something that we've lost. And that is where when I've often talked about, and part of the ethical core, as we will see, is the rejection of a state of injustice. Think of what it meant for a man like the Prophet to live a non-selfish life, a life not centered on personal well-being, because it was constantly a life which demanded that he stand in a position in which sacrifices are necessary and clashing with what is popular is necessary. Next time, inshallah, I'm going to continue. I have examples. I've picked 14 examples of early converts, 14 early converts. So we've covered 2 of them, so we have 12 more. So next halaqah, inshallah, I want to talk about these 12. And again, I avoided the obvious ones like Ali, because Ali, a 12-year-old that converts, and his entire life from there on, from that point, is about the Prophet and about Islam. You can't separate Ali's character from the Qur'an. It is true, his character was the Qur'an. And you can't separate anything he said or did from his relationship to the Prophet and relationship to the Qur'an. So what more can you say about Ali? He's another example of modeling where it's wrong to say, oh, but that's Ali, because then you're marginalizing it. But you need studying. If Muslims were in a better civilizational situation, there would be dozens and dozens of books and studies of Ali's example at a moral level, at a historical level, at so many. But all the books that are written are medieval, which is a civilizational statement. Same thing even about Zayd, because Zayd was another moral example that is larger than life. He even, I mean, we'll talk maybe about this later, but Zayd even marries someone who was much older than him, and if someone he was not attracted to, simply because of her piety. I mean, his whole life, and we'll talk about Zayd later, but his early conversion was immediate, and it was intimately tied to the character of the Prophet. This is, again, Zayd is the Prophet's adopted son, the kid who refused to go back to his own mother and father and chose to live with the Prophet. I mean, fell in love with this man to the point of saying, no, I don't want to go back to my family. I want to stay with you. And he stays with him. I also, same thing with Khadijah, because again, Khadijah's the minute Khadijah realized that her husband is the Prophet, her entire life became about Islam and this man. I mean, you don't see anything from that point on that Khadijah says or does that is not about supporting the Prophet and serving the Islamic message. So, you know, that's why I decided that in talking about the earliest converts, there's no point, because these are people we'll talk about what they've done later on in terms of serving the Islamic message, but they're larger than life. And I'm always just struck by how unequivocal and total the submersion of people like Ali and Zayd and Ja'far and Ali's brother and Khadijah. There is no tidbit of their life that is reported that's not about supporting the Prophet and supporting the Islamic message, which is remarkable. I mean, truly remarkable. But I believe that that's what was needed for, and that's how we understand the emergence of this message.
Can I read you something funny? Before we started the Sirah, I was, you know, like stray thoughts come and you start writing an idea, like, and I titled this idea, The True Miracle of the Qur'an, Pedagogy and Sharia. And I wrote, the Qur'an is deliberate and meticulous. The language of the Qur'an insists on its clarity. Clearly, this clarity has the intention to transform the reader or reciter. Yet for centuries, the reader of the Qur'an, exegetes included, have grappled with the text and often found its asserted clarity elusive. The same can be said about Sharia. Nearly every school in Islamic thought boils down adherence to Sharia to the Qur'an and the Sunnah, and yet the schools often vastly disagree on a great deal of conclusions. What is unique about this tafsir is that it demonstrates a pedagogical path towards a more moral destination. Many have noticed that legal prescriptions come in the Medinan phase of the revelation, emphasizing that if the Qur'an began with heavy ritual and law, that it would overburden the early Muslims. This may be true, although it does seem evident that dedicated disciples of the Prophet were already engaged in significant expressions of piety and preparedness for serious sacrifice, as evidenced by Surah al-Muzzammil. The particular moral pedagogy of the early revelations is far more understated. What I had in mind and what was coming next was a survey of all of the early surahs about how it clearly
Wow,
is
yeah.
laying out a moral pedagogy, slowly but surely, and compounding it and helping you to think through it, like what you just said, a muscle, so that you have the ability to constantly, in your changing atmosphere of social context, to have the ability to engage in a ethical ijtihad.
Yeah, subhanAllah, I mean, it's
Exactly what you
so,
were-
yeah, exactly what I'm saying.
Laying out.
SubhanAllah.
But that's like,
yeah.
but for me though, that was the clear pretext or the clear subtext of the entire tafsir.
Yeah, but I mean, it's excellent, and I really, this is why I keep telling you, you should publish that what, but it doesn't surprise me because of your relationship to the tafsir, you understood what it's about, and so, but what you're saying, it's exactly this. This is, and it's exactly, this demonstrates how right you are.
No, it demonstrates how right you are. Yeah, it demonstrates how right you are. It shows, but it shows how clearly it's communicated step by step, you know, like, and then but when you gather them the way that you did, but that was exactly my intention, was like, it was slowly, after I spent time with the tafsir, I started to see this point that you just now made, but it needs a lot of engagement to then be able to see it as a collection of, okay, we keep saying early Meccan. Okay, why does he keep telling us early Meccan? This guy likes all of these statistics about early Meccan or mid Meccan or mid, but because pedagogically it's a chapter in the moral intellect.
Yeah, exactly.
And so
It's
like
building
when you
up.
said Baqarah, you cannot engage Baqarah. You'll shut the book. I did that as a child. I got the Qur'an from the library and I opened up the first page or the second page and I thought Jews and Christians and then I said, what am I gonna do? I can't.
Yeah. It's amazing how it transformed your consciousness. If you are living a selfish life, then because that's what it's about to do. If you are living a selfish life, then your salah is meaningless. And it is completely tied in this notion of your salah has to translate into a giving life. And that's what, because at one point, as we'll see, the Meccans go to the Prophet and eventually say, okay, why don't you worship your God and we worship our God? But it wasn't workable because it wasn't about just salah. If it was, that would have solved it. It is about the norms that you are teaching that go along with the salah. Would make that, and the irony is that so many of the Meccan ethics are the ethics that we live by today. These largely individualistic, very selfish, very self-centered ethics. Social consciousness it's a luxury at most. It is not at the center of anything. And the way the irony is that social responsibility has become packaged in the idea of state taxation. It's like the state taxes you, so khalas, then don't talk to me about social responsibility because the state takes from my money. And that's classic of what the dynamics that, and even the expression that we often, my money. We always talk about my money, which, yeah, anyway. Maybe the day and age will come where there be marriage between this message and the right. There is no question in my mind that this is the original, this is the truth, this is the original, pristine risala as it was.
It's so interesting because when we went through the project Illumine, I mean, like, so many people write and they go, oh, you know, I'm so interested in the tafsir. I started at Surah Baqarah, right?
Oh.
And I mean, partly because you open up the Quran, right, and the 7 chapters, Surah Baqarah.
Yeah.
But so then when you think about that, then if we were to do it right, we would start with the first 10 surahs, and we would follow that path. But interestingly, that's not what we did in Project Illumine, because we started at Surah Hadid, and then Jathiyah, and then, you know, from there. And I'm sure there's a reason for that, for us in our time. But, I mean, because when we publish, we're going to publish in the order that we presented on Project Illumine. But, you know, it's also an argument for just really encouraging people to start from the beginning.
I think, Allahu Alam, but I think maybe because for us, that's what our consciousness, because it's Project Loom, it emerged. I mean, we didn't start out with the decision that we're going to do the entire Quran, but it's like our journey to, in fact, present, to go through, and to it required that maybe the order that we covered it in. But I think you're right. But there are so many. I mean, you can take this tafsir, you could teach. There's so much. Among the things you could teach is exactly what we're doing here now. Is, well, let's take things in the order of revelation, and let's study the tafsir and the messages of the Qur'an in the order of revelation. Or you could. Books can be written about, well, let's restate, which is something, I mean, is really, instead of the entire tafsir, let's write a book about the core essential message of each surah. That would be an invaluable book, because it orients you to the message that you should look out for before you read the surah. Because if you're alerted to that, comprehending the message of the surah becomes easier.
I have a question about reading what you have digested. So, ما تيسر من القرآن, reading, you said, read whatever you have digested. Does that mean you have to learn, or apply whatever you have understood, or... And in correlation to the civilization and these shuyukh, like, he's going to read whatever.
Yeah, I mean, what Matayassar definitely did not mean the way we use it today, is that, well, let's just recite a part of the Quran and that's it. I think the injunction is study and digest in parts, but definitely study and digest. So, in other words, yeah, God doesn't expect you to. In fact, the opposite. It's exactly when later on the revelation comes explicitly and says, you know, don't hurry through the Quran. And this, and we have, when the traditions that, and this tradition occurs through the narrated through the voice of several different. It says that at the time of the Prophet, we used to study an ayah by ayah and then understand it and practice it before we move to the next. I think it was describing exactly that type of reality, that we have to take each segment of the message seriously and study it and reflect on it. And I believe that's what they're meeting in when people constantly, you read constantly these references about كنا نتذاكر القرآن. it was definitely not someone reciting and the others just sitting there and saying Allah, Allah, as often. It was, we were discussing what does this require of us? What is it that God is telling us we need to do? Sadly, I wish more of that was preserved I mean, imagine if somehow they had like a reporter sitting there reporting on what the different companions said about it would have been amazing, but that wasn't in the, I mean, they were not a literary, they were not a culture of writing anyway. So it took a while before that emergence.